Hello everyone, and welcome back to Module 2, Printing Datasheets. I'm Lewis Weber for Behavior Care. Datasheet 1, Datasheet 2, that's where we are going to focus on this segment. Datasheet 1, in fact I'm going to go back to the table of contents and see what it says. 5-day datasheet for each student in the class. A 1-day datasheet for all students in the class, but I must add 5 per datasheet. You can only fit 5. The TPS fits 5 students on the datasheet because printing the maximum of 24 students would be a very small type. We'll take a look at that, and so you can decide which one to use. All right, my preference, if you don't mind me saying, is going to be datasheet 1 because it gives you 5 days of a datasheet. So you print it once for the week, and then you can file it in the student's cumulative file or wherever you're keeping important information, and it's a great backup for that student's TPS file. Okay, so the first thing you do is go up to the top here and enter Monday's date. You always enter a Monday, whether there is school or not. The reason why is because it's going to populate all of these days, and you have 5 days being listed. And so I've entered 8, 18, 14, and there it is, Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and so forth. You'll note that the academic blocks are being listed for that student. You'll note that we have the classroom points heading because we're going to use that, let's say. And we have the 3 increasing behaviors that are being listed for that student, in this case Gail, and 3 decreasing behaviors. You'll also note that there are these X's. Where did those X's come from? Those X's came from data entry. Let's go over to Gail and take a look at what we have for her. I'm just going to move to the right. And there's Gail. And you see I'm going to bring this all the way up to the top. You can see that I've put some X's here. I've put them on this tab, on the data entry tab, to say I'm not going to be recording task completion during lunch, and I'm not going to be recording independence of the task completion during lunch. However, I still am going to record the quality of the transition, and I'm going to also record some of these decreasing behaviors if they occur. So that's why I put an X there, because I am saying it's not going to be used. We're going to go over the N's at another time. For right now, it's X that we're focusing on, and the X says we're not going to use them. Okay. I've also X'd out this column because I'm not using that column. There's nothing there. Now, if it turns out I'm going to add a 4th behavior that would show up in this slot, I would then take those X's out when I decided I was going to start recording, and those X's would be gone. Alright, so when we go back to our data sheet, you'll see that those X's show up here, which is telling you or your aide, teachers or aides, telling teachers and aides that they don't need to focus on those cells. Forget about those cells right there. They're not going to be used, which is convenient, so you don't have to think about it. Now, what are you going to enter? Well, first you're going to print this out. Let me get to that, and then I'll talk about what you're going to enter. So we go to print. Now you'll note that there are 24 students listed down here. There are 24 data sheets that could be printed, and these are my 5 days. Okay, and if I click on the next sheet, you'll see it looks pretty much the same, except it's going to be for another student. And I'm just moving through it. It's taking a little bit of time. Let's go back one. I think that is Gail's. Let's see. Yep, there's Gail. Okay, I can see it. It's pretty small, but I can see it. That's what Gail's data sheet looks like. Now, Gail's data sheet is the 5th data sheet. If I only wanted to print Gail's data sheet, I would put print pages 5 to 5, and that would print just Gail's data sheet. You want to be careful about that, because if you don't put any number there, it's going to print all 24 of them, and you probably don't have 24 students in your class. and then you'll just go in and print whatever sheets were there. Okay, that's the printing part you got to keep in mind. Alright, so we've printed the data sheet, and we look at the top here, and it says to enter a 0, a 1, a 2, or a 3. Now here is something that I need to tell you. You can enter a 0 here if the behavior doesn't occur, but you're not going to enter that 0 when you go to data entry. In fact, let's move over to a student that I have entered data for, okay? You don't enter zeros if the behavior doesn't occur. You just leave them blank. And then you might be thinking, like, then why am I asking you to write zeros if the behavior doesn't occur over here on the printed data sheet? The reason why is because if you leave it blank, then it's not clear whether you remembered to record data or the student didn't do it. And so by putting a 0 there, you're saying, I was here to record the data and a student didn't do it. And so I write a 0 as a teacher. I've recorded that 0. But I save you the trouble of having to enter zeros here. Here we're just going to leave them blank. If you have written any zeros on your data sheet, you just leave those off and just leave them blank, because TPS knows that a blank is a 0. Saves you the trouble of having to enter all of those zeros for when a student is behaving appropriately. It's a huge time saver. All right. So, let's go back to the data sheet. All right, now you're entering your numbers here. So task completion during arrival and morning work. What's the amount of behavior? Well, in this case, amount might be how much work he did leading to completion. Did he complete the task? Would get a 3. If he completed his task, he would get a 3. If he did part of his work, a middle amount, he'd get a 2. If he did a little amount, it would be a 1. If he didn't do any at all, it would be a 0. What about on the decreasing side? Same number sequence. 3 means a lot. If his physical aggression to himself was very high, you would put a 3 over here. If his physical aggression to himself was medium amount, then you put a 2, or a low amount, you put a 1, and if he didn't do it at all, you'd put a 0. So this way we're rating not whether it's good or bad, we're rating how much occurred, how much physical aggression to self, how much physical aggression to others, how much verbal aggression. And the larger the amount of that, the larger the number, a 1, 2, or 3. Same thing on the increasing side. The difference is not in the rating system, the difference is in the desired outcome. We want 3s on the left side, we want 0s on the right side. You also get to write some different notes here, if you're so inclined to do so. Okay, now what about this n? We've talked about the x's, but what about the n? You will use an n to say there was no chance for that student to have data recording because there was no chance for that behavior. So let's take an example. Let's say on Monday there was no active board. So what I would do is I would put an n all the way across here to say, you know what? We didn't have active board today, and so we're not going to record any data. The reason why that's important is when we go to data entry, if I did not have these n's here, a blank would negatively impact the student's percentage because it would be calculated as a 0. When we put an n there, the n basically says, don't worry about that cell. We're not going to use it. It's not going to be part of the calculation. And so the student isn't negatively impacted by it. So the n's are very important, as well are the x's. They do the same thing. The difference is that the x's, once you've entered an x, it continues forward for each day so that you don't have to keep entering them. But the n is entered on a particular day to say no chance. No chance for measurement today. Now, you don't need to enter n's for the classroom points. It's a different system here. This is not relying on percentages. This is just a straightforward number that you put in. So if you don't need it and you're not going to use it, you can just leave it blank. Now, if you wanted to put that there were no points earned, you are welcome to put a 0. However, you're not going to enter those into the data entry as well. You will only be putting positive numbers for this column. Okay. One more thing I want to tell you. Always enter a Monday, even if there's no school. Like, for example, Labor Day. No school. Look what it did. Look what TPS did. It knows that Monday is not a school day, but I had to enter 9-1 because that is the Monday. And look what it does. Because it knows that there's no school, it leaves that blank. It leaves everything blank. And so it says, ignore it. And it starts on Tuesday with academic blocks and X's and so forth. Now, what about if a student is absent? All you have to do is write the word absent there. Don't put any N's or anything in there. Okay, just write the word absent. And then when you go to do your data entry, you will write the word absent. We will finally find a clear spot. Here we go. One more. One too many. All right, you would just write the word absent right there, which is a reminder to you. It doesn't do anything but remind you. And all you'll do is leave everything blank. TPS knows that if there's no data collected, it's because the student was absent. Now you can put in there why he's absent if you want, and there's some other things that we can do if a student is suspended. For example, we can put a WTG 10, which is an infraction 10, which would take off 10 points for each day that they are suspended, if we want to do that. But that's for another time. All right. Now, what about DS2? Same thing. You always enter the Monday, but when it prints, it's going to print one day of a data sheet. I said Monday. What I mean to say is enter the date of the data sheet. Okay? Please excuse that. And so let me just make that point again. On DS1, it's enter Monday's date of the school week. But on DS2, you're printing a daily data sheet. Enter the number of the date of the day, enter the date that you want the data sheet for, and it will print that up on top, and 5 students will be printed on that data sheet. And their goals. And you can see they're kind of small, because we have a lot to fit in there. Okay? So each student's goals and each student's academic blocks and all of their X's and all that stuff will get printed. Same rules apply for printing, though. Okay, 5 different students in this case, 5 sheets. So be sure to print, like if you just wanted the first page, because you're only doing this with 5 students, you'd print page 1 to 1. Okay, the thing about this data sheet 2, is you have to print a new data sheet every day. I think it's a little more convenient to print one data sheet a week, but sometimes it is better for a particular kind of classroom to have one data sheet and have multiple students' goals, target behaviors listed. So you get to decide which one you're going to do. All right. And I think what we're going to do at this point is put a bookmark in our training. That's almost 14 minutes of how to print a data sheet. And I hope that's been informative to you once again. My name is Lewis Weber, TPS Training for Behavior Care. Thank you very much.